Hello, and welcome to everyone listening to the Written in Melanin podcast, the place where you come to get your weekly dose of melanated creativity. I'm your host, CM Lockhart, an author of fantasy books featuring black girls who aren't all that nice, and the owner of the Melanin Library, an online database of books written by black authors. And in this space, I share with you everything I've learned on my journey as a black and indie author. I'm glad you're here. And today, you guys, I have Robbie J. Atkinson joining me on the podcast, and she is renowned for her avant-garde storytelling. She stands out for her innovative approach to weaving intricate red herrings and injecting a dramatic essence into genres such as thriller, action, and sci-fi that elevates the complexity of the characters and the plot. Her films and graphic novels alike use fictional backdrops as a landscape for allegorical commentary about race, class, and culture. She's the writer and director of the psychological horror film Kalimba, as well as the creator and author of the manga series The Seventh Kingdom, Fukushu no Okoku. Despite her penchant for dark thematic undertones, her stories centralize hope, connection, and resilience. And she is here today to talk about all those things because, wow, you have an amazing literary journey so far. So it's really great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, for those of our listeners who do not know you, have not heard of you, do not, for whatever reason, follow the Melanin Library, where we were talking about the Seventh Kingdom, can you let them know who you are in your own words?
So, I like to think of myself as a storyteller, a story enthusiast, and a storyteller. And that takes two mediums, that's through film, and that's also through writing, through graphic novels. And really, I'm just a creative on an endeavor to share unique stories. I just gave a presentation the other day about how right now we're in an era of exploitation films where everything is remakes and revamps and sequels and trilogies. And I seek to introduce original stories, new stories, fresh perspectives with more cultural diversity, giving voices and amplifying the voices of people of color, marginalized communities, and also touching on societal issues that would make you think. The goal is not just to tell a story that entertains you and awes you, but a story that makes you think and reflect about society and societal problems that we've normalized in general, really, so that it resonates with people. So people walk away from these stories feeling seen and heard and reflecting on themselves. And I think I hate to say the cliche, but like walk away like wanting to be a better person.
No, I mean, the cliche exists for a reason. And honestly, I wish that, as a people, a culture, a society, however you want to word it, that we had more stories that cover the whole gambit. Because here's the thing, I love a good story, right? And I know that we try to milk it for all it's worth, but I'm also really tired of remakes. Sometimes something that was good should just be left at what it was. It was good, it was great. It was the moment that it existed in that time. We don't need a newer version of it, repeated, regurgitated, twisted, changed, modified for a new audience when it was like, it was what it was because of when it came out and how it came out and who was in it. And it's kind of like trying to carbon or not carbon copy, but mass produce lightning in a bottle. And it doesn't always work that way. So I'm really glad that you are trying to bring new stories into multiple mediums. And also, like you said, giving people something to think about because I am of the mindset that you need both sides of the spectrum, right? Especially when it comes to marginalized people and black people, especially. It's like we need the stories that are going to make you think and make you kind of sit with yourself and question what's going on in the world around us. But I also think that we need stories that entertain and that are nothing more except our stories told our way. And sometimes I feel like the conversation can swing so heavily like a pendulum, like it's all, no, we just need to tell our stories. Like we don't have to explain things. And then to the other side where it's like, oh, we have to show our experience. We have to show our pain. We have to show our trauma. Otherwise people won't think about it. And I feel like there has to be a balance between them, you know?
I agree 100%. Balance. I think that adding that complexity to me, that as a writer, that is just what makes it even more interesting, is not just giving people something that will wow them, but figuring out a way to relay information that they piece together themselves and they are left thinking about it long after. It's not about just the film. It's about the experience after the film and how you feed your audience with that. Right. I had a conversation with a colleague the other day, and I remember them talking about a character in Kalimba, the character Mom, Cassidy's mom. And someone had once told me, like, oh, like this character is so complex. Like, why don't you just make her like this? It follows the format, the typical format better. And I said, well, I don't want to follow the format. I want the character to be more complex. I want them to be something that the audience is grappling with. I want her to be someone that people try to understand. That is the point, is when you make characters that are truly resonate, they don't always just fit in a box. People wrestle with them a little bit, right? Same with the stories and the situations.
Yes.
And he had like a hard time wrapping his mind around that. He was like, but you're making your job harder. I was like, that's okay though. And harder doesn't mean bad. As a writer, a challenge is not bad. That keeps things fresh. That keeps you on your toes. So that's how I look at it.
Yes. I'm so glad that you brought that up because it, for me personally, it's like really good timing because it's one of the things that I was really thinking about because I have like coaching clients and I have the great fortune of being able to talk to a lot of writers of all different types and all different walks and all different paths. And so something that has been coming up recently within the past couple of weeks is, how so much of the content that we are offered and consumed very much has to follow a very strict structure, a very strict outline, a very predictable path. The characters have to be a certain way. And if you guys are listening to the podcast, you might have heard when Bethany Baptiste was on and she talked about her character and how she wrote a black girl who is a bit unlikable. She's a little difficult. She's not very nice and she doesn't fit into, like you said, Robbie, this neat little box of what is acceptable, like a very acceptable version of a black girl in fantasy. And I'm glad that you brought it up because I feel like we need, and I say need kind of very broadly generalized, but I feel like I personally want, and as a society, we need more stories where it's like characters don't fit into these neat boxes because, like you said, you want something that's going to feed your audience. You want something that's going to challenge them. And if every character that you meet, regardless of their background, regardless of how they became who they are, fits into a very nice, neat little box that every other character that you've ever seen fits into as well, we're not really introducing a wide level of diversity. We're introducing the same character with a different skin on them. And we're expecting people to, like you said, be fed and have empathy and to think critically. And it's like everything doesn't have a nice, neat little bow. Sometimes, there is no redemption arc. Sometimes there is no meaningful growth from the people who did you wrong. Sometimes there's no comeuppance, even though you're waiting for it. And those things are also meaningful in a way of understanding the world and processing how you exist in it and live in it and move through it.
You mentioned something about just presenting differently, and that's actually, it's funny. It's so interesting how things tie around because I was just talking about that on TikTok. Alt presentations of blackness too, and some of the comments that I've gotten, but we'll touch on that later. So
I mean, if you would like to talk about it, for sure, bring it up because there's always this conversation that has to be had about how blackness is not a monolith and we exist in all the same spaces that you see other people existing in it. So, yes, there is this common version that a lot of people seem to be familiar with, but there are also the quiet ones, the shy ones, the introverted ones, the straight up mean ones for no reason, like you said, the alt ones, and the neurodivergent ones. And we come in all shapes and sizes, just like everyone else. So I appreciate it because when I come across it on my TikTok feed, I'm like, ooh, okay. Some things I admit, I'm like, that's not for me. I was like, I can never pull that off. But you go, girl, you look good. You better do that.
yes, I second that motion.
So, redirecting the conversation just a little bit, let's talk about your creations because you have a short film, but then you also do graphic novels and manga, and you're also the. Okay, clarification point. Is your production company your production company or are you a part of the production company?
It is my production company.
Love that. So I thought it was, but I wanted to make sure I didn't want to make assumptions. So can you just talk about that? Because you're exercising your talent in so many different mediums in so many different ways, and they're all creative. And especially when it comes to like manga, that's something that, as Black people, we're not usually allowed to dabble in, when people think of it, they think heavily, oh, that's 100% Japanese. That's not something that a black person could ever write. So I would love to know more about like that in your journey and kind of how you have broken into multiple of these industries.
So I guess starting off, RPX originally started off as just a film production company. Really, it was just an idea at some point. And I remember thinking about the idea when I was working another day job as a teaching assistant, a paraprofessional with the SPED unit for K through 5. So I remember for like 2 years, I worked in elementary schools around Cobb County. I also did substitute teaching at some point, and I found myself during my lunch break kind of putting together and organizing and setting up everything for my company. And eventually I founded it in 2019, which was like right before the pandemic when everyone was shutting down.
Yeah.
And I took that opportunity to really just dive headfirst into trying to create. Really, we did a lot of music videos, we did a lot of dance visuals starting off. And then we had partnerships at some point with a company that arranged K-pop concerts, and I used to do videography. I would interview, so I worked with groups like BY, no, I worked with groups like Oh My Girl, Mont. I worked with the rapper Doki. He's very close with J Park, or was at some point, and then even BY. And now recently I had worked with a group named TAN, got very acclimated to that. And then when the pandemic hit, all of that shut down. So I really just focused on visuals, visuals, music videos, things like that. And I would say that I did that for a bit. And a turning point for me was when I kind of returned to my original passion. And that really was to tell stories. And while dance visuals allowed some degree of storytelling, it wasn't as profound. So I went and did kalimba. And as I was doing kalimba, I was already thinking like I had wanted to have a graphic design and illustration branch of my company. And I wasn't quite sure when would be the appropriate time to make that jump. So I focused on kalimba. And in doing kalimba, I got so many comments. Like, I mean, I'm going to be honest. Yeah, they say that entrepreneurship is not for the weak. And that's not meant to be an inflammatory phrase.
Mhm.
That comes from how brutal the entrepreneurship process can be. And after a
Yes.
time of doing films that I thought I had to do just to make money and kind of just not being really happy with it, not being content, not feeling that I was truly expressing myself, when I took that leap of faith and did kalimba, I felt like I was in my element. From like the table readings, like I pulled the actors together. I did research on some of the larger directors and how they prepped their actors, and I pulled them together and we looked at art to try and get them to figure out which artistic piece aligns with your character. And we had a whole
Mhm.
like table discussion about it where we broke the characters down. So when they showed up to set, they knew who their characters were. But that was such an amazing experience. I said to myself, I mean, if I could do that, then I can do the manga. So I said, all right, let me try it. And I reached out to one of the illustrators that I had connected with because before we had a program, we had like a referral program where we would essentially post artists' work on our website and we would showcase it, and people would reach out to us and say, hey, I'd like graphic design, I'd like to pick this artist. They pick from our catalog.
Mhm.
And there was one particular illustrator that I had connected with, and their name is Walla. And Walla had kind of just stuck with me. We did a project together that actually fell through with another client, and we just kept in touch. And I told them about what I wanted to do in terms of this manga. And years later, like my dad passed away, a whole bunch of just major life events
Mhm.
happened. And then I finally reached out to Walla and I said, I'm ready to give this a try now. And Walla said, all right, say less. And so we kicked it off. And honestly, when I met, Walla's illustration level was like at a certain place. Walla was kind of working at a small comic. And then when I finally decided to pick up this project with the manga, The Seven Kingdoms Fukushino Koku, Walla had like gotten picked up by an editor at Shueisha Inc., the company behind
Mhm.
Naruto, One Piece, Demon Slayer, and Walla had like leveled up completely. And Walla had like a team now. And so I was like, oh wow. So we set off, and that has been the process leading up to that. And I think that the same way that I had to take tenets from directing actors and use it for writing the script for this series, for this manga series, because you have to know what motivates your character, what their emotional objectives are, what
Mhm.
their practical objectives are. What are their emotional obstacles? What do they want to do? Who's physically holding them back, and what's emotionally holding them back? And use that to inform the writing process. And I guess one last note is, when I'm writing this character, to really keep the main character interesting and really kind of keep every character interesting, I have an overview of how I write each episode. I call it episode because in my
Mm,
head, it's already an animated series. Like when I started this, that was like the end goal.
love that.
So I write each Thank you. When you write each episode, I think to myself, okay, this is what I want to do. This is the overview. This is how this is going to go. But if I get bored in the middle of writing it, I know that because I have a thorough understanding of my character, their their motivation, I can throw in something that actually veers from what I wrote in terms of the overview. As long as it ties back together to what I wrote, it's fine. And it actually makes it an adventure for me as a writer and an adventure for those who will be reading it, because they get to see the character go through all these twists and turns in one episode.
Honestly, there was so much goodness in everything that you said. If you guys are listening to the podcast, like I really hope you are like taking to heart what she is telling you guys, because there, like I said, there were so many things that you said that it triggered thoughts that was like when you start talking about entrepreneurship and it not being for the weak, like truly, because I started Written in Melanin in the Melanin Library 2019, right before the pandemic. And it was a very unique time to be trying to start a business when everything is shutting down. The world is literally changing around you faster than you can understand it. And there's so much grief happening en masse and people being affected in real time. And you're like, hey, by the way, spend money recreationally on my thing. Would love that. It's a different thing. So being able to, you know, take that in stride and power through it, because I think the hardest thing about being an entrepreneur is that it's a lot easier to just not be one. It's a lot easier to stop. It's a lot easier to give up when you hit your roadblocks and to be like, you know what? Well, I tried. It's very difficult, and it's difficult to be the person who has to make the final decisions and realizing that any decision that you make could be the make or break decision that changes things for the better, or, ultimately becomes why Rome fell in a day. It's a lot of pressure and everyone
Yeah.
doesn't work well under that. But I'm glad that you stuck with it, because it is something that is entirely rewarding when you can really stick it out and you can start to see the other side where things start to come to fruition, and the things that you imagined in the beginning when you set it all up. It's like, oh, this is real. Like, I've accomplished this goal. Like, the goalpost is always moving no matter who you are. But to be like, oh no, I did that. Like, I thought that was so far away when I started this, but it's behind me now and I'm looking at bigger things. So that part is really cool. And then also, just the timing of everything, because I think that's something else that kind of goes hand in hand with both authorship and being a creative. Like on the podcast, of course, we talk about writing and authors, and me specifically, I lean very heavily towards fiction and fantasy specifically, because that's what I write. That's what I naturally enjoy and have a proclivity towards. My SAT word for the day. But it's also one of those things where it's like, it is very easy to see everyone else's journey and want it to be faster and want it to work out, or you meet the right person and it's just not the right time for the opportunity to align the way it needs to for what you have in mind to truly be successful. And getting that timing down is hard for everyone, I think. And just patience. Patience is, they say it's a virtue because it's hard to come by, but like truly being patient and being like, okay, just because it's not happening right now, like with your artist, it's like, I like this person, we vibe, we mesh, but understanding that there are still things that you needed to experience in order to bring what you wanted to your collaboration. And they had things that they needed to do and to level up to get to the point where now the product that you have with the Seventh Kingdom is so much, I'll say grander, most likely, because you're both in different places further along in what it is that you were trying to do, rather than trying to do it in that moment when the things weren't aligning the way they were supposed to. And then the third thing that you said spoke to me as an editor, because when you were like, I know my character well enough that I can throw whatever situation at her and know how she is going to react. And also understanding that if you, as the writer, as the author of your work, are writing this story and you are bored, something else needs to happen. We need to go a different route. We need to deviate from the plan. That is such a word, a moment, and it's something that I say to literally everyone who will listen. If you are, as the author, are bored, so is your reader. You need to do something different.
I think something that I really try to prioritize over the years with my creative process is fun. Like you said, if you're bored, you need to change it. So, fun. How can you make this adventure more fun for the character? How can you make it more fun for yourself? How can you make it more fun for the people who are reading? How can you make it more fun for the illustrator? Because for me, my illustrator has to read the script. Walla has to read the script. And I've gotten feedback from Walla where Walla was like, wow, I got chills from that, reading that. This is going to be, like go where the fun is. And I think some people will be so concerned, going back to that whole concept of like box, putting your characters in box, they'll be so
Mm-hmm.
concerned about sticking to formats and rules and boxes and what you're supposed to do and checking off all the boxes that by the time they're done, they don't have something that they themselves feel that they went on an adventure with. And for me, I think too, having grown up now as an adult, but growing up as an only a child, any story that allowed me to go on an adventure and allowed me to like, if I sat in my house all day, but I felt like I had gone around the world through like Pokemon, the
Yep.
adventure was good. The world building was good. It was rich, right? And so that is essential. That is essential. And I think that is where I came to appreciate the fact that I had to do film before I got around to writing this manga because I took directing actors through Sundance Institute. So Sundance Film Festival has a Sundance collab. They had like an online course and I took a number of online courses. I
Mm-hmm.
studied under Tessa Blake, the woman who directed some of the American Horror Story films, and she talked about understanding your character's motivation. And not just that, I remember having lunch with a good friend of mine, filmmaker, fellow filmmaker, Richard Corso, and he mentioned something to me that I had never before thought about. I think with even the film projects I did, world building. Because yes, you can make a character that like but if the world is not rich for them to run through, well, they're kind of just running through a town here, running through a town there. And so it's not as dynamic. So he challenged me to look into, he asked me questions. He said, all right, so you have this fictional world named Praetoria, right? And there are seven kingdoms. What is each kingdom like? What's the history behind it? What kind of food do they eat? What's their
Mm-hmm.
architecture? What's the folklore? He asked me all these questions, and I was like frantically grabbing paper and writing down the questions that he asked. And I probably spent like a month building out the world. And I have it still on my Google Drive. I have like, it's like a 35-page world building thing where I have the names of the royal families, the architecture, the influences, the food, some of the stuff I like made up. I like took from like this country and that country and put it together and came up with a name for it. And had to use like a map generator to like carve out the provinces and the names of the city. I mean, part of making this an adventure as a writer, especially for something like fantasy, is the character can be dynamic, but the world has to be just as dynamic. And when you develop that out, then you start to also develop out like what are the social things at play. Like in my book, there's systemic oppression, there's classism, and how is that reflected across each of the kingdoms? It's a story of revenge. What does our main character grapple with? How does she see revenge? How is revenge reflected back to her throughout the story? Or does she grapple with forgiveness and redemption as well? And who's motivated by what? So all of this are things that I had to really dive into to fully make it well rounded, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And like I said, I'm glad that you're saying these things because I think as authors, as storytellers in general, it's so easy to get caught up in one particular aspect of your story, whether that be the character, whether it be the plot, whether it be the dialogue. And sometimes you forget that, as complex as your character is, their world needs to match them. Otherwise, like you said, they're basically just floating in space. And it has to align in such a way that even the in between points, match up. So it's like if a character is doing something, especially if you have high stakes, especially if you're doing something epic, where it's just like, okay, these actions are going to affect the monarchy or it's going to affect the world at large. You have to understand what the world at large is and why what they are doing actually is affecting it and how and the repercussions of that. And it's just like when you can fully understand that, I feel like that's when you start touching into creating not just good stories, but really truly great stories. Because at the end of the day, I feel like a book, a really good book, a really good story should feel like the world existed before that character came into existence. Even if that's not true, even if the character came first to you, the world should feel like it was there before them and it will be there after them. And it should also feel like this character is a product of their world. So the things that we naturally take in and the way that we naturally move and talk is because, speaking generically, as a black person in America, that there's a certain level of racism and macroaggression and microaggression and obstacles that comes with navigating living in the United States as a black person. That's just a reality. So a lot of the viewpoints that you get, going back to what we said earlier about, not necessarily stereotypes, but, blackness not being a monolith, a lot of that is informed by the fact that we live in the United States and it looks different. That's why you have different cultures, different dialects. And, this is something that I think we inherently understand because we also understand that culture in the United States is very different from culture in like South Africa or culture in the UK. Like everybody moves different and is a product of their environment. So when you're writing your stories, it's really important to understand exactly what you just said, that the world is complex and, your character should definitely be a part of that. Like they should have the same level of complexity, I'll say. But I'm not going to harp on it because I get really passionate about things like that. And it excites me to come across other storytellers and creatives who say the things that I'm thinking out loud,
Yeah, we're on the same wavelength here. I love it.
Yeah. Okay. So I feel like we've touched on a lot of it, but I do want to ask specifically outside of, complexity and fun, what to you is like the key element, the chemical X that goes into making a genuinely good story? Like you have to have this.
Well, the film student in me, and I guess all my professors would applaud if they heard this, but the film student in me wants to say conflict.
Mm.
The key to any story is good conflict and multidimensional conflict. And yes, the character has a certain objective. Yes, the character is trying to accomplish that, but they encounter other people who have their own conflict. And how do they respond to that conflict? My main character, for example, lives in a world where everyone has been oppressed by the Seventh Kingdom. And so she's been living almost like in a vacuum outside of that influence. And when her village is attacked, she comes to realize this as she travels outside the First Kingdom to the other ones. And she hears how people talk, and she's faced with people's apathy and their hopelessness. And her hope, for some people, they find it inspirational. Some people, some characters, it's almost like it's a wake up call that makes them aware of the fact that they had given up, and it actually makes them become defensive and it makes them hate her. Because she says to them, well, why have you accepted this? Why don't you just fight back? And they're like, how dare you? This is the way it's been, right?
Yeah.
You know? So how does she respond to that conflict, her own internal conflict, when she starts to realize that what she thought she knew is not at all what was in fact the truth? Who she thought she knew was in fact actually a stranger. Um, how do your characters respond to that conflict? And what other people interact with this character in such that it adds complexity to the conflict? I keep saying complexity because I think for me it's so important that you don't write a two-dimensional flat story. And I think that a brief side note, all of the films, stories, anime, manga that I enjoy, they all are like a Rubik's Cube in that there's a different face to
Mm-hmm.
each aspect of it, and every side has something interesting. I use complexity as if it is analogous or metaphorical for like a Rubik's Cube in terms of writing, where there's multiple faces and levels that can be adjusted and moved. And so just like how intricate can you make this conflict? There's a bigger issue at play that is actually beyond the main character just getting revenge against the Seven Kingdom. And there are characters that
Mm-hmm.
she's met who are part of this conflict and she doesn't quite see it yet. So spoiler alert, or I should say at least hint for anyone who reads it, be on the lookout for Easter eggs. They're going to give you hints for a larger thing at play, and just all the ways that you can take that loaf of conflict, break it up into breadcrumbs, and place it around for people to pick up on it. And if you see it, if you don't, provide layers for people who, if they want to look deeper, they see the philosophy behind it. If they don't, they just get a good fight scene and a win-lose, right? Thank you.
Yes. If you're only listening to the audio version of this podcast, just know that I'm doing my little silent clap. Y'all know I don't actually clap hard on the podcast because I'm not trying to do that to the audio. But I am like, there's a part of me that feels so just like at peace with everything that you just said because I okay, so
Hey.
slight tangent, right? But I have gotten to a point with books where I feel like there's this increasing trend of the author just being like, I'm just going to tell you what everything is. There is no subtlety to the art of storytelling, or it's being lost in a lot of the stories that I've been reading and picking up. And when you were like, there needs to be complexity, there needs to be breadcrumbs, there needs to be everything kind of comes around. And I don't know if you watch, read, interact with One Piece or not, but I am a huge One Piece fan. And one of the things that I really appreciate about it from just like a storytelling aspect, right? Because if you guys listen to podcasts, y'all know I'm a huge anime nerd, huge manga nerd. But at the same time, it's like one of the great things about One Piece, aside from the fact that, a lot of people are like, oh, it's a cult or it's toxic. Fan base aside, one of the things that One Piece does really well is that Oda incorporates so much into the world. The world is so big and it's so vast, and nothing is introduced without a purpose. Everything comes back around. It might be a couple hundred chapters later, but it wasn't introduced without reason, without purpose. And I like things like that, and especially things that make you think, that leave it up to you as the reader to put the puzzle pieces together. Not saying that they should be put together by the end, right? But if you give me a breadcrumb, I don't want you to tell me, hey, this is a breadcrumb. You should pick that up and hold it in your back pocket until we get to the end. Like, no, let me find what I find and pick up what I pick up. And I am very much an advocate that when you're writing a story, those breadcrumbs are important, because everything should lead up to the end. Even if your character misses it the first time, I mean, not your character, your reader misses it the first time, they should be able to think back to all the things that happened and realize where it was leading them. Or if they go through it a second time, they should be able to pick up on all the little subtle pieces that you added in there to lead up to whatever your finale is. Like, those things are important. So hearing you bring that up and hearing you say that and mention it, and it's just like, oh, okay, this is not in fact a lost art. It's just not in the mainstream as heavily as it should be. And the things that are popular are not always the things that are good, and that is a hill that I will die on.
Amen. Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Conversation for another day. Yes, I can relate to that. I had a conversation about that just the other day with a friend. Man, don't even get me started. That's
okay, but that we will save that for another day. I have a couple more questions for you. One being specifically on the challenges of writing a manga, because, like you said, you're working with someone who is, I'm assuming, if they are working with the same companies that, do Naruto and, Demon Slayer and the popular ones, they are not actually located in the United States. And I'm also going to go out on a limb and say that English is not their first language. So, what has that experience been like? And I guess what's also the most challenging and also rewarding aspects of being able to create a true, genuine manga?
oh boy. So my illustration team is actually located in the UK. Walla
Okay.
and their assistant are actually both British. However, Walla is actually of Jamaican descent, like I am. And so that was actually something I
Oh,
found out like
very cool.
recently, and I was like, oh, so we're kinfolk, okay, right? But in terms of just the collaboration process, I would say, strangely, it's weird how life comes together because I have a history of like making friends with people who are in other countries and like using Kakao Talk, which is a Korean chatting platform, or like Line for friends in Japan, or like WeChat. So I was so accustomed to just communicating with people abroad, like throughout most of college. I had friends who like lived in America and then moved to other countries, or I had friends who wanted to learn English. I met them on an English a language exchange website, and we have been friends for years, and I got the practice of like communicating regularly via that medium. So when this collaboration came up, using Discord to essentially create a schedule, stick to deadlines, send over drafts to look at, provide feedback, ask for this, ask for that, was not hard, especially because, like, say, so I also have a nonprofit that takes an arts based approach to fostering conversation about racial literacy, right? And all of my volunteers for that nonprofit have been across the world, like Russia, Dubai, Turkey,
Hmm.
Cameroon, Nigeria, like people from all over the world. And we did all of that through Slack. We did a whole bunch of Zoom meetings, everything. So I had so much experience with compiling information in an organized way that it doesn't overwhelm people, chunking it, providing it, asking for this, asking for that, providing hyperlinks, so on and so forth, to where just the collaboration process has actually been quite seamless. And I'm just such a organization freak that if I find myself getting cluttered somewhere along the way, I immediately find a way to make it more organized and essentially make it easier for the illustrator and I. And I think that maybe the biggest challenge with all of this may sometimes be the time zone difference. But really, I think
Hmm.
that Walla and Alicia have just been so great about it, just being attentive and chatting and whatnot. But I think the other challenge, really, because I'm actually about to release the sneak a peek version. So for my series, there's two versions.
Hmm.
There's going to be the chapter or like volume, like the first volume, and typically before that first volume full release there's going to be a sneak a peek, which is like a small moment in the full chapter that people can kind of read. It has like a overview of like where the kingdom that the character is in, what's happened leading up to this point, and it kind of starts like in the middle of like some action, and then you watch it take place over a course of pages. And then I have like a thank you for reading QR codes to go to our merch shop to buy merch, which, by the way, I've gotten a lot of feedback. People really like it. So, shameless plug, if people are interested in merch, you want swag, you want something cool, not an ugly shirt with an ugly logo on it, but like something actually stylish, let me know. Head over to our shop. But, anyways, I have all of that. And putting together the ebook has been a different kind of challenge because normally,
Mm.
because we are starting out and we are still new, most times you have a team with like the typesetter and you have the person who does the formatting for the ebook and everything else. But I don't have that. So I've been doing that myself. And
Oh, fun.
a challenge I faced was actually, oh, thank you. Yes, it's been a process, it's been a learning curve. And because it's a manga that reads from right to left, I actually, I remember on Sunday, I spent literally from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. researching code because I found out about this software called Caliber, had to download Caliber to
Hmm.
convert my pages to EPUB, and then had to figure out how to reformat the reader so that whatever platform I upload it to, it will read it from right to left, the way manga is read in Japan.
Mm.
And it took me almost 8 hours to look up and find code that worked. And then took me more time to like plug the code into different areas in Caliber and figure out like which one worked. And finally I got it. But like it's really the technical aspect that has been a process for me. Everything else has been pretty smooth, especially because with online reach, when I did my research, ebooks are such that they tend to have a wider reach, they're more prevalent. So if you can find an aggregate distributor,
Hmm.
you can get onto several channels, really. You just have to have your materials ready and promote it. Another challenge has been marketing. I literally wanted to be an eight
Mm.
week business class so I could learn about my customer persona, so I could figure out annual projection sales, so I could figure out everything about this book like it is a business to make sure it succeeds, to make sure I don't write it and it sits there and collects dust on the internet. So I had to learn about marketing. I'm taking a digital marketing class right now, like as we speak. So that has been a challenge for me.
No, like that's very real. That's very real. You've probably already thought about this, but have you tried Adobe InDesign? Because I'm pretty sure there's a feature in there that literally you just check it and it says right to left when you export it. So
No,
that's a thought. You
you.
do.
I'm gonna look into that.
Yeah, I do. I do formatting and things like that. So, slight plug for my services. If you're listening to this podcast, I do book formatting. So, you guys can head to the Written In Melanin website to check that out. But for you, I know that you've already put a lot of time into it. But yeah, check out Adobe InDesign. You do have to pay for the Creative Cloud Suite because it's like a subscription thing. But it is super, like, it is the easiest way, in my opinion, if you're going to go for granularity in formatting your books. It is the easiest way to go about it. But aside from the formatting aspect, I'm glad that you also brought up marketing because as like creatives, like that is it's wild how that is literally the hardest part of all of this for most of us. It's like, how do I get people to read it? You need me to write a thousand words in a day? Cool, I got that. You need me to come up with a synopsis, character sheets, world building? You need me to make up a fantasy language for this world that I decided lived in my head? No problem. You need me to talk to people? I don't know. So there are lots of ways
Yeah.
to definitely go about it, but I highly recommend that if you guys are listening to this, for sure, do your marketing, take it seriously from the jump because, as you mentioned, Robbie, it's a business. And I think sometimes it takes a lot of mental reframing to get to that point to remember that yes, we are artists, yes, we are creatives, yes, we are wanting to do the things, and in a perfect world we would all have assistants and marketing teams to do the things that we don't want to do, but in the real world a lot of times that falls to us. So yeah, it's a business, treat it as such. And if you are, this might ruffle some feathers, but I'm going to say it anyway, if you're looking to be successful, you really do need to sit with yourself and be like, how many books do I need to sell? And at what price do I need to sell them in order to break even, in order to make a profit? Because I will tell you this, it's a mistake that I fell for that Ben had to correct me on because he is much smarter than I am. And he was basically like, hey, you can't sell the book for this price. So a lot of the prices that you see, especially if you are an author and you're like, hey, I see hardbacks priced at this price point, or I see ebooks priced at this price point, or paperbacks at this price point. A lot of those price points are from traditional publishers who can afford to take a loss because they own the publisher. So their overhead is different from, say, I don't know, if you're going through Ingram Spark or Drafted Digital or literally any other place that has an overhead that you are not responsible for. That price that you have to pay to cover the actual printing of your book is going to be higher. Therefore, if you want to make any profit margin, it has to be higher. And understanding, like really understanding those numbers and understanding what it is that you need to do, because sometimes we set our goals being like, okay, I just want to sell 50 books, right? You know, that when you're starting out, that sounds like a really reasonable goal until you realize that 50 books is not even going to get you anywhere close to breaking even, let alone funding your next book, you know? So it's like you have to set reasonable goals for yourself. And it's like, you want to sell 50 books a month? Okay, we need to figure out how that works, how that breaks down, what needs to happen to make that happen. And again, that might ruffle some feathers
Yes.
because I understand there is benefit to being modest, to being humble, to having reasonable goals, to scaling your goals as you grow. But there's also benefit in understanding what needs to happen so that you can actually make strides towards your goals, for because for a lot of us it's a full-time creative career, whatever that looks like for you. And for a lot
Yeah.
of us that means writing books or writing movies or writing scripts or writing for anime or what have you. You want to write, you got to get people to pay you for it. Okay, I'm done, I'm off my soapbox. Thank you for coming to my TED
Mhm.
Talk. But
No, I mean,
eh,
and here's the thing. This is a point that I've heard someone talk about. I spoke with a business coach one time, and she said to me, like a lot of people will approach, whether it be creative or anything, like think that could operate as a business. They approach it from a place of modesty and say, oh, I just need to do this little thing. And it's like, no, no, no. It is not modesty to make something and not shine your brightest. It is self-sabotage. And when you play small, that will come back to haunt you.
ooh, that is a word.
Yes. She ruffled my feathers when she said that. She said, you need to show up and you need to shine and you need to stop hiding your stuff and you need to look into, I mean, she really gave it to me. But I needed that. And that also, I think, is what made me mindful, aside from the fact that I just really wanted this series to be something that people see, people really see it and enjoy it. So it reaches as far as possible. But like, is modesty needs to go out the window. And likewise, you have to switch from that creative, imaginative, and you can still be creative to a certain extent, because I've
Oh
heard
yeah.
someone say with business, the level of success you have can sometimes actually be correlated with how creative you can be with money and marketing and other aspects of business, right? But you have to kind of switch gears from that creative sense to that business minded, like you said, down to the numbers, annual sales projection. What are your overhead costs? How much are you going to spend to advertise it? How are you going to advertise it? Do you see what I'm saying? And if you write, I mean, it's a general rule of mine to go where you've never gone before. You must do what you've never done before. And don't start off aiming for the floor, aim for the moon, because even if you miss the moon, you'll be with the stars. So aim high and
Yep.
move and act and plan as if you intend to hit that high target. That's just how I approach everything with my business.
As you should. And like I said, that is a word. So honestly, if you guys are listening to this podcast and you made it this deep into it, please do not sleep on all the good advice that is being given in this podcast, because it is a side of writing, of being a creative, that we don't normally touch on a whole lot on the podcast, because it's usually the creative side of how do you do the thing, not, the other side of you're a business now and you have to move and navigate as a business, and that is completely different from moving and navigating as a creative, and that's okay. But it takes more than just I wrote a really great book or I wrote a really great story. But with that being said, we are coming up on our hour time mark. So I do have one more question for you that I ask everyone who comes on the podcast. And that is, what writing advice would you give to any new authors who are just now starting out on their writing journey?
Oh, this is a good question. I would say that first find your inspiration. For me, this series, both Kalimba and The Seventh Kingdom, were motivated by personal experiences. Our main character, Clarabelle Kata, in the Seventh Kingdom, basically, it's a coming of age story. In addition to it being all these sci-fi, fantasy, action, swashbuckling adventure, it's really coming of age and her coming to realize like certain truths about just the world she's in and people she's around, and also choosing what she will accept and what she will reject that other people seem to have become complacent with. And that was very much motivated by like my 20s, my experience throughout my 20s in a number of different areas of my life. I would say that your life is an amazing adventure with moments of highs and lows. And if you struggle to find inspiration, you can either look within your own life, within your own struggles to find something, or go out and enjoy just the process of other people's art. And sometimes you'll see a picture that will just like call a story to mind, and you'll say, okay, so like what if I have this character who has this personality or this situation? How would I expand on that? How would I, and just allow yourself to dive into that rabbit hole. Again, coming back to the concept of follow the fun and follow all the fun. If you're writing and you suddenly kind of just need to take a break, but you're thinking, what does this world look like? Put together a board, go on Milanote, and put together a collage of the architecture and this, that, and the other. And if you think, well, what does this character look like? Put together a collage of what the character looks like. Why do they look the way they look? What has influenced that? I would encourage new writers, rather than beat yourself over the head and push yourself and pressure yourself and get frustrated and all of this, make the process as fun as possible and go with the flow. And you'll find that when you do that, because I have times where I'll write like 3-4 volumes in like a week. And then I'll have a whole week where I don't write anything except like 5 sentences if in one episode, right?
That's real.
And don't beat yourself up over that. Like, just let it flow as it flows, and everything will come out as it needs to. Have fun. That's my advice.
Absolutely. And you guys know I second all of that, because I don't subscribe to the mindset of that you need to write every day. You need to write in a rhythm and a routine that feels authentic to you. If that's every day, great, go for it. If that is 3 times a week, great, go for it. But write in a way that is productive to you doing the thing that it is that you want to do. But that being said, you guys, that is it for this podcast. So Robbie, if you could let them know where to find you on the interwebs, I will take us out.
Yes. So if everyone is interested in the series, they can visit www.rpxmediaproduction.com/the7th Kingdom. That's the official webpage for the series. And there you can access the shop. You can access the bookstore to order whatever version of the book you want. And if you want to follow us on social media, I recommend Instagram, in lieu of TikTok being in a weird place right now, at
Agreed.
@the_7th_kingdom. And I think that's just about it. If you're interested in seeing my film, Kalimba, we will be announcing the release date for it, and we'll make it available on the internet. But if you go to the RPX website, then you navigate to films, you'll see the drop down for Kalimba, and you can click on that. And eventually you'll be able to just watch that from our page. So thank you.
Awesome. So you guys know that there will be links in the place wherever you are getting this podcast from, whether that be your favorite podcast platform or YouTube. There will be links to do all the things down in the description box below, or show notes. So that being said, you guys, that is it for this episode of the Written in Melanin podcast. If you'd like to support this podcast, then please share it with someone you think may enjoy it. Join the Patreon at patreon.com/written in melanin, or grab a copy of my books from my website, cmlockhart.com. There are links in the show notes for everything, and thank you guys again so much for listening. Until next time, I hope all your books are full of melanin.